last summer, we did a wilderness trip. When we got there, we were out of food. We got hit by some pretty nasty weather days that, kept us pinned down. There's a part of this, my old days brain, that when you're done with a trip, you celebrate and you eat garbage. Thought that I killed that part of my brain. But then we got to Wales. The only option, was to go to the village store, just stocked with nothing but garbage. And so in that moment, I was like, well, okay, I feel metabolically strong enough. I'm not going to slip and I'm going to just allow myself to eat this junk. Unbelievable how fast all these old symptoms came back. Feeling crappy, sleeping like crap, sluggishness. My ankles were like getting poofy. It was unbelievable. And it's like, it took maybe 2 weeks to kind of feel like I was back on a good, even keel. But I also am happy to have had to have that experience to just remind myself that that is poison and to just stay away from it.
Bjorn, how are you? Can you hear me okay?
Very well. Yes.
Well, thank you for doing this. Where are you currently located?
I live in Homer, Alaska. I'm originally from interior Alaska, but I've lived here in this coastal community for the last dozen years or so.
Okay. I've never been to Alaska. It's one of the places I need to get to. So how is it up in Alaska these days?
Well, we're definitely in the transition to autumn. We've got it's been frosted twice, but it's got the chill in the air. We had a real wet fall, which is kind of not a lot of fun, but
yeah.
Great.
I know. I guess somebody said there's a lot of mosquitoes in the summertime in some parts of Alaska. I'm not sure if that's where you're at, but yeah.
Your ears have heard correctly.
Yeah, mosquito. And then it's cold. And of course, it's cold in the winter. So anyway, but a lot of people, it's beautiful out here. I have to get up there and see sometimes. Well, Bjorn, I guess just go ahead and give us a little bit of your background, if you don't mind.
Sure. Like I said, I grew up in interior Alaska. My folks were kind of like back to the land hippies. They started homestead in the late 60s, early 70s. And so my brothers and I were raised with a real organic, back to the land vibe. We had a fish wheel on the Copper River so we could catch all of our salmon, in that concentrated period of time. My dad was a big game guide, so we ate a lot of Dall sheep and caribou and moose growing up. And then eventually we moved to another coastal town. And then I kind of found my inspiration in the outdoor adventure community. It wasn't really a community. There were just a few people that, do ice climbing and mountaineering and kayaking. And so that for the longest period of time, it's kind of like been the centerpiece of my life. I'm a independent filmmaker and I work for some environmental nonprofits, but I kind of define myself by my wilderness adventure. And so over the last dozen years, that's really been exploring what is possible with this new technology called the fat bike. So, the fat bike was invented in Alaska to ride on winter trails like the Iditarod Trail. But so I've been for about the last dozen years or so exploring far and afield with these things, covered now thousands and thousands of, roadless miles with the fat bike. I assume that we're going to wrap this around into what's your dietary history. And, so for a lot of that time, I kind of got captured by the mainstream, like this is how you eat when you do this. And about 3.5 years ago, I just started getting fatter and fatter, sicker and sicker, sorer and sorer. And then finally got some blood work done and found, that I met, nobody used the term metabolic syndrome. But, when I started doing my own research, I was like, holy crap, look at my blood panel. I got each of these symptoms. So that's what really kicked me in the seat of the pants to try to figure out a solution to be able to continue to do the things I love to do, which is wilderness adventure and, outdoor recreation, I guess.
I have not heard of the fat bike. You'll have to describe that a little better. Is that a pedal bike or a motorcycle or what is it? What exactly is a fat bike?
It's a human powered bicycle, but it has 4 or 5 inch wide tires. And so, in the late 80s, or in the early 80s, rather, when the Iditarod race, the dog mushing race, was just kind of getting going, the Iditarod race started in 1973. And that's a race. It's, about 1,000 miles. It goes from South Alaska to Nome on the Bering Sea coast. And the original organizer, the dog sled dog race organizer, reached out to other outdoor people, outdoor communities, skiers and bikers. He's like, hey, this trail is great. Why don't you use it? And so they started this race called the I Did a Bike. And everybody realized, even in those days in the 80s, that you need a wheel or you need a wider tire to deal with the varying snow conditions. And it took the industry quite a while, but in 2005, one bike company, bigger bike company, finally produced a rim that's about like 80 millimeters wide, and then a tire that was 4 inches wide. And then a lot of people, especially in like Minnesota and Wisconsin and other places, that are in northern climates, saw the appeal. Like, wow, these trails, these snow machine trails, dog sled trails allow you this ability to recreate in the winter. And it's really blown up, over that period of time, like kind of on an exponential growth curve. Globally, and then so the other thing though is that we can use them in the summer to do these wilderness trips on, trailless wilderness trips. And then there's another Alaskan invention called the pack raft, which is a sub 5-pound, 1-person inflatable raft that you can put all your gear on, cross a body of water, a river, a stream, a lake, and then get on to the next. Because, Alaska is like really big, vast, and roadless, with, very few bridges. So these, this is this kind of wild dual sport.
Yeah.
So they say they can't here.
So you, you said you grew up kind of hippie or kind of thing, but eating a lot of, wild game and that type of stuff. And then you got convinced to try the dietary recommendations, apparently. What did that consist? What did that look like for you? Your diet, the diet that got you sick, what did it look like?
Yeah. Well, I kind of have a hunch that I'm particularly sensitive to, the standard American diet, but because I would still consume, the quote unquote health food, but, that was like high grain vegetables and, I never completely omitted meat, but especially on these wilderness trips where your metabolism is ramped up and you're working hard and you're pouring sweat every day. You can go into bed often really cold and shivering. And, it's like, it's kind of, extreme physiological state you go into. Lots of just garbage, like Snickers bars and those energy blocks and, things that I knew on some level from my hippie mama, that like, this isn't good food, but I got sold on this idea that you always need to be spiking, you're keeping your blood sugar levels topped off. So my whole day would just consist of eating on those trips. And I really kind of thought that there was no alternative. I thought that was the only way. When I first heard about intermittent fasting, I just, it seemed ludicrous to me that would be something that people could actually do in a real world context. And now I completely changed my mind on that.
Well, let's talk about that. You do your own blood, you realize you've got metabolic syndrome. So what happens at that point?
It was really challenging. I actually was in a state of deep depression, I would say, for about 3 or 4 months, because I kind of thought that I was going to continue to, like, one of the big bummers beyond seeing all those, metabolic markers, dysfunction markers, was that my knee just continued to get progressively more and more achy. And I'd had, an injury years before, and the swelling it was noticeable. I could see it. And so I really thought that, I considered myself to be pretty young at 45, that I was going to have to, or maybe 44, that I was going to just have to stop doing this sort of stuff. And there was a handful of little nuggets on the internet that started me down this pathway of, thinking that low carb might have some answers. And then what was really interesting is that there was a Native American guy from the Southwest, and he gave a presentation on, he called it Neuro-decolonization. And it was about, breaking the chains of colonial thinking in your mind. And it doesn't matter if you're Native American or, white or whatever, that we each have these, things that we've been conditioned by in our contemporary society. And he had, for him, it wasn't this esoteric thing. It was like, here's a recipe to follow to break yourself of this. And it was, ancestral diet and intermittent fasting. And it was at this time when I had a few other pieces of this information, and the way he succinctly put it, it was like the mic was dropped. I was like, holy shit, there's something here. And then I found people like you and Barry, and like the internet floodgates just started opening. And and I committed. That was the big thing. Like at first, I didn't kind of realize that some of, being in a ketogenic state was binary. So I was like, oh, I'll eat some low carb stuff. And I was kind of like dancing around the edges. But then I just was like committed, and holy crap, the difference was profound.
Describe it if you don't mind. How did it go different? I mean, improvements in knee pain, improvements in overall health. What was going on?
Right off the bat, just started seeing weight loss like I hadn't seen before. I'd always kind of tried to keep that under control and had no, appreciable impact. In fact, I think every year I just was getting, a couple pounds heavier. And so, really kind of blown away by those first few, what everybody says, those first few water weight pounds, whatever. I was like, whoa, that's impressive. And then my knees started hurting a lot less. And then the more that I zeroed in on it, the more clear-headed I became, and I wasn't thinking about my blood panel at that time. In fact, I was a little bit worried. I was like, oh my gosh, is this going to make things worse? I was getting quite a bit of pushback from my inner circle community of friends. Thought that I was being nuts, but I just stuck to it. And then, 2 years later, I went back and got the blood work done again. And it was a complete, reversal on all those metabolic markers. And then I even did a hormone panel and found that, everything was just like stellar. So yeah, it was pretty profound, I hear all of the stories, that, you promote, where people have like serious autoimmune disease. And, I don't think that my story is profound in that sense. Like people are resolving, clearly very, much more serious issues than I am, but mine is mine. and it feels very wonderful to have had regained health, and to feel like I have a new lease. I don't know if it's going to be 60 or 70 when I'll be like, okay, rein it in on doing these wilderness trips, but that's a hell of a lot better than 45.
Yeah, I mean, when we look at metabolic syndrome, I mean, obesity, blood pressure, triglycerides, glucose, and then HDL are the classic markers for that. So I assume those all improved for you, correct?
Yep, that's exactly right.
And how old are you now, Bjorn? I didn't get that.
I turned 48 in July.
48. So yeah, so you've been doing it. So how does it impact you? You said you couldn't imagine doing these long wilderness trips without kind of stuffing your face through full of snacks and keeping that blood glucose always topped off. How do you perform now without doing that?
It's so amazing. And I got to say, I'm really proud of my partner too. She has very different physique than me. I have this Scandinavian kind of like wide and broad build, naturally muscular, and she's a lot leaner. And she was really against this diet at the beginning. And part of the why she was against it was she thought it was going to kind of corrupt these shared experiences that we have, including doing these wilderness trips together. And like, how are we going to cook, and share one little, 2-quart pot that is typically going to have, what used to always have either, like cereal grains for breakfast or spaghetti at night, things like that. But I have just kind of been showing to, her through, not by telling, but just by living, that it's worked so well. So for example, we did a pretty hardcore trip last winter. Then we've done a bunch of trips since I've switched, but I feel like this one was the one where it really felt like we're clicking on a new formula for how we fuel ourselves on these trips. So I do still drink coffee. So in the morning we wake up and we get a fire going and we make hot water to fill our thermoses with boiling water for the day and drink a cup of hot coffee. And I just drink it black. She puts some powdered cream in it. And then we just take off. And it used to be that we would like have that, cereal breakfast in the morning. And then by, 10 or 11, you're already opening up the snack bag and eating all day. And now I just go all the way through till 3 or 4 in the afternoon. This is physical exertion, working hard, never feeling that, those hunger pangs. Cause at home, I've kind of conditioned myself to, I guess, the ghrelin but so at 3 or 4, we would stop and use some of that hot water to make like a hot cream. Like there's instant cream that you can make an afternoon hot drink, take a little break. And then I make a lot of my own jerky and salmon, smoked salmon strips. So we would eat just a little bit of that. It wouldn't be like a meal. It would just be a snack. And then continue the day, finish the day, and then make one big hearty meal at the end of the day. And that was the cycle, and when you do that for 2 weeks, I think that lets you know that your body is using its own endogenous fat when it needs it. And, just running on all cylinders, none of those old spikes and valleys, from before, which, I wrote an article about, the last trip that I did in my old broken metabolism way and how I just wrecked me. I just felt so hangry and wiped out and now that's just gone.
Hey folks, it's Dr. ShawnBaker here. If you guys are enjoying these success stories, well, you can become your own success story. You can do that by heading over to CarnivoreDiet. You can sign up for a free 30-day trial and get started today. We're looking forward to supporting you. Our community is wonderful, and we'd love to see your success. Living up in Alaska, I don't need to tell you, it gets cold quite a bit, and there's not a lot of mangoes and bananas, and there's probably not a lot of, grains growing up there. I assume not. I mean, obviously there's some berries and stuff like that. I occasionally watch these survival shows, and they stick people up in the wilds of Alaska somewhere up in northern Canada and say, gut it out, live. And, they couldn't eat what the standard American diet or what the dietary guidelines recommended in that environment. And I mean, is that realization to you where you live? You're like, hey, if I had to live off the land, what would I be eating? How does that impact you from where you live?
Well, very, very much so. I now, 2 years ago, I had myself down to about 80% of the food that I consumed, I procured myself. And this year I didn't have as good a luck. I spent, the week that I had to go caribou hunting and just could not find any caribou. So I'm buying a local beef, but we still, put away like 70 salmon this year, and that's normal, for us. The connection to Alaska's native identity and this, knowing that there have been thousands of years of people that have lived here without those things that you said, grains and, fruits and all, the modern, slop. And not only that, but I'm a documentarian, and I make films with Alaska Native communities, and I see, like the quality of life from having that connection to your food resource to be able to go hunt the walrus, the caribou, the seal, the whale. That is an identity that is being lost. But then also the robustness, you see these pictures of people in the 50s with their shirt off when they're dancing, and they're just ripped, and they don't go to the gym. They're just living an incredible life, an engaged life with the natural world and eating this, incredibly nutrient dense food. And so I try not to proselytize too much, but I want my Alaskan Native friends to understand that this is, very ancestrally appropriate for them. I believe it's ancestrally appropriate for everyone, but I think particularly for them with only 50 years of this garbage diet and the skyrocketing cases of diabetes and cancer and heart disease and on that we're experiencing here. And, it's an epidemic, that there's this elegant solution to this problem.
Yeah, it's a simple solution in my view. It's kind of interesting. When I was practicing as an orthopedic surgeon, I had a patient, she was in her 80s, and I ended up doing a hip replacement on her, but I was talking to her, and I found out that in the 1960s and early 70s, she spent 20 years up near, I think, Wiseman, Alaska, living out in the remote wilds by herself and her husband. They did that for 20 years, and they lived on basically caribou and maybe got a few berries here and there. But she said that was the healthiest, best she'd ever felt in her entire life. And it was just, there's a documentary actually called The Year of the Caribou, which is, I've watched it. It's not it's not the most exciting film in the world, but it does document their experience. And sadly, their son actually died. They fell through the ice, as a teenager.
I know this story. Yeah.
So anyway, so she was a patient of mine. I thought that was just kind of cool. And she was telling me that she's never felt better when she was just eating caribou meat and living out in the wild. And so it was just a different, unique experience up there. Are you outfitting for people? You said you're mostly doing documentaries and stuff like that. What was some of the stuff you've been working on?
Well, so to answer the first question, I was a backcountry wilderness guide for a lot of time in my 20s and 30s, but I have now gotten away from that. And so the films that I make kind of run the gamut, so I do these kind of, biopic films about our trips. And I'm with this nonprofit that's called Ground Truth Trekking, that we use these wilderness expeditions we're on as an opportunity to learn about, and then to, either write articles or produce films to educate people about some of these complicated natural resource issues that are going on in Alaska. We're very much seen as a resource extraction colony to the rest of the world. And even before I became a carnivore, I place a higher priority on conservation and having intact ecosystems, which we currently have. And then by becoming a carnivore, that has just amplified it even more, that we need to keep these, the porcupine caribou herd, for example, and we need to keep that intact for future generations that are going to want to be able to eat caribou. So conservation, adventure is kind of my, that's where I kind of marry my themes. But then I do actually quite a bit of work with native tribes. I'm working with a tribe right now called the Native Tribe of Diomede. They're one of the most remote villages in Alaska. They're where Alaska and Siberia just barely touch. And so there's the Bering Strait, and that is the narrowest little waist. So there's this little 3 mile by 2 mile wide island, and then 3 miles away to the west is Russia. There's another island right there, Big Diomede. And this is a walrus culture. This is probably the last, hardcore subsistence culture because it's so remote. They kept making their skin boats rather than buying modern crappy aluminum boats. And they have been able to always harvest up to, 400 walrus a year, which means that they get enough food for their community, but they also have enough of the hides left over to be able to make these skin boats that make them very seaworthy mariner culture. And sea ice change and climate change have really hit these people hard over the last decade. And so it's really only because of climate change in the last 10 years that they've not been able to do what, has been, their thousands of years legacy. And it's this such a depressing, and I don't know how to spin it any other way that's not like, depressing, but it is just a fact that without that sea ice platform that they've always had to rely on, now the kids have anemia because they're eating top ramen instead of walrus.
Yeah, I was going to wonder what their health was like, seeing they were still living off their sort of native surroundings. I assume it was generally pretty good until, I guess recently where they have to eat the top ramen. And I remember eating that stuff in college. I mean, it's kind of like you think of that as just a cheap food, and it really is poor nutrition. Gosh, it really is. Let me ask you, Alaska, I don't know, maybe because I don't know. Is there a lot of farming that goes on in Alaska? Is there in the summer, is there a lot of farms, and can they produce food much there, or is it limited?
It is limited, but it is burgeoning. So we have 3 hotspots for agriculture in Alaska, 3 regions, and where I am is one of them. And it's on the scale of here, it's more on the scale of like farmers markets and CSA shares and that kind of, that capacity. People where I live are really, doing their own home gardening to get their root vegetables put away, for the year, and eating things, within season. And then there are some semi-industrial farms, but nothing like you see in, whatever the lower 48. But, still there is grain, barley primarily. And that's often is, used for our cattle feed. it's burgeoning, and that's where the food security people, most of the people that are working on that, because here's one of the depressing facts that 95% of the food in Alaskan grocery stores is imported. And so pandemic really helped people think about like, oh shit, that makes us pretty vulnerable, huh? And so there's a lot of thought and energy and intention into like, how do we shrink that number? But, there's a long way to go fixing that. And of course, there's a long way to go in educating people about what good nutrition is.
You mentioned, you didn't have an autoimmune disease or anything that many people go on this diet for. They do a very restrictive version of the diet because, quite honestly, a lot of things bother them. You didn't have that. What does your diet look like currently? I know you mentioned salmon, and I assume there's some sort of red meat of some type in there. What does it look like day to day for you?
Well, so it's funny. I've always been inspired to try the most restrictive lion diet. And so this month I'm doing a challenge. I figured, I've got more salmon than I have red meat currently before the cow gets here. And I always thought it'd be funny to try a sea lion diet, I'm calling it, or I eat nothing but salmon. So I'm doing that that'll be ending in a couple of days here. And then I'm going to switch to the lion diet for the rest of the month, which will consist of a wonderful goat that I got recently, but I'm probably going to burn through that pretty fast. But in general, moose and caribou, take up the majority of my red meat. And then, last winter around December, I did buy half a local beef from a buddy that lives up the road, and it was just amazing. I love the wild meat so much, but oh my gosh.
Yeah, I think there's a reason we domesticated the cow. I mean, it does taste pretty good, I got to tell you. But I've never had moose. I've never had caribou. How are those?
Well, caribou, I think, is the one that most people find to be the most palatable of, a Dall sheep in Alaska is really choice. There's nothing off-putting ever about caribou in my experience. It's a meal you can put in front of any, red-blooded American that's used to, medium rare steaks from CAFO lots and whatever, and they're not going to turn their nose up. And moose sometimes has just a little bit of a flavor, but it's one that I think, people usually acquire right away. And it's hard to kind of pinpoint, what it is about it. Like, of course, you want to get those animals when they're not in the rut. So I'm not talking about that kind of off flavor. But, some people will say, oh, I'm not so crazy about moose. And then you see them a year later and they're like, oh, I love it,
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming does moose have a bit more fat on it than, say, some of the other animals, or no?
You can definitely get, honking, fat on moose. Yeah. Yeah. And it's all about, like the caribou, unfortunately, the place where I've been hunting caribou lately, they're not very fatty, and that's sad. They have to, get other fat to, for the burger and such. But yeah, moose is almost always, when you get them, at the right time of the year, got a bunch of great fat on them. And, caribou in other areas also do have great fat.
Yeah. You mentioned, intermittent fasting. So I'm assuming you're not eating as frequently as you were prior to. How much, if you don't mind just sharing your dimensions, you said you're a broad Scandinavian. I was guessing from the name, it made sense, but how much do you eat a day and how frequently?
I'm pretty much a 1 meal a day person these days. I've never gotten into like the scale and even like the figuring out the grams necessarily, but I do play with high fat, high protein from time to time. I love, one of the things I love so much about, low carb in general and carnivore in specific is the idea of not depriving yourself. So I make, a meal that is satisfying, and I eat it until I'm comfortably stuffed. And so what that looks like, I have a big bowl, and I have a big ceramic plate. And often what that'll be is, the bowl will have like some like bone broth, or, often, try to have some bone broth in that bowl, chunk of red meat, some salmon roe, maybe an egg or two. Yeah. Something like that. So much of like what and sometimes I'm like, oh, maybe I should dial this in and be a little more scientific about it. But another part of me is like, no, I like that. It just feels natural to eat until I'm full.
Yeah, I think that works. That's pretty much, I just eat till I'm pretty full as well. And I'm currently doing a one meal a day sort of paradigm as well. Unless I get hungry, then I'll eat a second meal or something else. But yeah, it works pretty good. Somebody's asking, or somebody's commenting that bear is bear part of the diet? Do you ever get a bear and eat that? How does that taste?
It's good. Yeah. And in fact, that's one of the things that we do have reliably here where I live. So I sea kayak also, and I sea kayak across the bay from where I live. It's like a 3-mile crossing, and then hunt, by kayak, which I really enjoy that hunt, and possibly maybe even me going this weekend. The one thing about bear that, they're monogastric and they have trichinosis. And so the one thing that you got to do is really cook them, so I make a lot of stews, almost exclusively I make stews, with them, but it's a wonderful meat. It's got a great texture.
Yeah. So monogastric, for those who don't know, instead of a 4-chambered stomach like a cow has, they've just got the one stomach, like us, like we do and dogs do and cats and pigs and all those other things. And they do have a little different way they process things. You mentioned your partner was initially reluctant to doing this. Now, is she transitioned to a meat-based diet now, or carnivore, or what is she doing?
Yeah, I would not call her a carnivore, but very low carb, and has really prioritized good, meat as the cornerstone of her diet. And, she just recently, she's 10 years younger than me, and finally decided to go get her blood work done, and saw that all of her metabolic markers were great except for her LDL too. And, which mine is also, high by, their standards. And, but her physician, she was like, well, what if we, maybe tried to, add more grains or whatever. And she's like, well, but then, when my she's like learning this stuff secondhand from me. And she like asked her, like, well, wouldn't that make my triglycerides and blood sugar go back up? And the doctor's like, well, yeah, I guess you're right. So, okay, this looks good. So yeah, she's doing really good. And I think that what she knows is that if there is any sign of breakdown, she will know how to tweak it. Whereas I didn't have that, knowledge, in hindsight when I was falling apart, and she's not falling apart right now. So what she's doing, I see, works really well for her, but she's just automatically adopted a kind of a more lax intermittent fasting routine than the one I follow. But it's, she just is kind of naturally falling into her own rhythm with it. So low carb, animal based, I think, is what, if you needed to classify hers.
Yeah, a lot of people fall into that category and doing quite well with that, by the way. So I remember there was a documentary, and I can't remember the name of the physician, but he did something in Alaska with some of the First Nations people, and he put them on a low carb diet. You said you see some that are local to you, and I guess, I don't know how many native Alaskans are, in your community, but do you see any impact, or any of them interested in trying to go back to a more ancestral way of eating? Have you been able to have an impact on any of those folks?
Well, I think my efforts have pretty much turned up, empty so far. There's a food magazine. It's like a free magazine that, goes out into all of the boutiques and restaurants and stuff in the summer. It's like, I think it's maybe like a quarterly. And I've pitched them a story a couple times because, I want to try to, frame it from that perspective of like, these diseases of civilization used to not occur here. What has changed, and what happens to, and use Revero as like a, hyperlink to like, look at, here's evidence of people that, from all over the world that are recovering from these diseases by just doing this simple thing that is very historically appropriate, ancestrally appropriate in Alaska. But yeah, I mean, if anybody has been inspired by the nuggets that I, kind of drop every now and then, they've kept it to themselves. Cause I think most people have kind of drunk the Kool-Aid, like literally, like our national public radio station every day that, and that's the way, that's the main media source that gets into every little, nook and cranny throughout Alaska. There's I think it's Department of Agriculture, whatever, it has an ad in place. Everybody knows that, 3 servings of fruits and vegetables is healthy, is what, what is right for, and you see everybody in the, whole state kind of mimic that. So yeah, I think that I'm pushing back against a much bigger tide than what I myself alone can
Well, no doubt. Yeah. And I think, I know in Canada, which, they had the sort of the First Nations food igloo. It was like a sort of a, it's, kind of supposed to mimic the food pyramid. And they had these foods that would in no way, shape, or form ever have been something they could have been exposed to, all the grains and fruits and vegetables, which don't even grow up there. They're saying this is your appropriate natural native diet, which obviously doesn't make any sense at all. Have you had any some negative experiences? You'd mentioned your LDL cholesterol is a little elevated. I mean, have you had any actual physical, I feel bad, transition issues, gut issues, sleep issues, or anything negative at all since you've adopted this?
No, not in the least. I mean, of course the transition, but that feels so distant. And, and I did kind of like learn, I made a mistake right off the bat. I was like, okay, I'm going to commit to doing this. And that was, that was keto. I hadn't read about, even though I grew up reading Vilhjalmur Steffenson's other adventure books. I hadn't read his, Bellevue, experiment, carnivore books. And so I didn't realize that carnivore was even a thing. It's funny. I always like go back in hindsight. And I'm like, how is it that, this was surprising to me to learn about what people like you and others are, discovering, because I'm from Alaska, where like clearly that's the, was the standard and the norm. But anyway, my experience was that I dove in, was like, okay, I'm going to do this high fat, moderate protein, less than 20 grams, whatever carbs a day kind of thing. And then I had to travel for work, and I was going village to village to village. And of course it's, really hard when I've been conditioned to eat that slop, for the majority of my life. And then you're a host in somebody's house, and they're offering you spaghetti, and they're giving you pilot bread with, peanut and butter and jelly on it. And that's dinner, and it's hard to say no. It was hard anyway for me at that stage. And so I crashed and burned. And then when I got home, then I really took it seriously. And holy shit, I forgot your question.
No.
Negatives. Sorry. Yeah, the transition. Sorry, that was it. The negatives was, so when I went back, to do my second, commitment to eating low carb, I did have a little bit of that keto flu, and I might have had a little bit of, digestion issues, but then it was over. And then then I started just immediately seeing the benefits of, losing the water weight, starting to lose pounds, feeling lighter on my feet. And it's, I'm like, my sleep has improved, my sex life has improved, like on and on and on and on and on. I can't just list all the things, yeah.
In Alaska, obviously there's big variations in the season between summertime and wintertime. The light exposure, in the wintertime can be minimal depending how far north you are. I mean, there's some places where there's literally like close to 24 hours of darkness in a day. Does that affect your diet in any way? I mean, when it gets extremely cold, I know some of the natives would have to rely more on fat in the diet. So do you have to when it's really cold out there, do you have to increase your fat intake, or how do you deal with the different, seasonal variations?
So that's the really interesting, point, that I kind of have thought about that. And I have one other friend in Alaska who is also low carb, animal based. And she's really doing an experiment along those lines of like, in the fall time, trying to really up her berry consumption and, do things that would be in a more cyclical, seasonal thing. And, and I find that fat to protein ratio, it is just kind of a natural, thing that I fall into, but I don't know that I've like really reflected on, it's December and it's dark, I need blah, 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 or I feel like I need more of this or that. But what I can say is that I, went in for my hormone panel in December or January last year. And that's another one of the things, mood, like I've never had anything that I think would, be considered like clinical, depression or manic depressive or whatever. But I think all Alaskans to some degree feel the pit, the darkness, has some effect. And I am no, like me as well. But noticed the last couple of years that that's just not happening. And, like I'm always going to get my daily exercise. I'm always going to be outside, even if it's only, 2 hours of direct sun on my face. I'm going to make sure that I prioritize getting that. And that's been consistent, before the diet. But I got my hormone panel, and one of the things they looked at was my vitamin D levels, and it was, through the roof. But yet I was not getting, the sunlight. And that's part of my theory anyway, that, part of like what has kept me feeling on a level of a more even keel in the darkest months of the year is just having access to the vitamins that, I need, particularly vitamin D.
Yeah, maybe all the fat in my, because you sound like you eat quite a bit of fatty fish in the salmon, so that may be another source of that helps out with that. You mentioned fat. I mean, if you're eating a lot of game meat, where do you get your fat from? Is it all from meat? Or do you add it? Do you add it from butter or dairy sources, or do you do any dairy? I don't know.
Yep. I'm not opposed to dairy. And, so 2 falls ago, this fall, I'm doing this like salmon only thing. And then last fall, what I did was local food challenge, which was, just eating salmon and caribou and moose, basically. It was able to get enough fat, in my diet from just those natural sources, what was on the meat or the fish. But I do sometimes, I've got a great butcher up the road, and they do, process CAFO beef from lower 48, but majority of what they do is at least Alaskan, and often it's grass finished Alaskan. And so I can go buy, 20 pounds of, fat from them if I'm making burger, or if I want to render it into my cooking oil, my lard or tallow or whatever. But oftentimes, friends too, they go caribou or moose hunting. Like you say, moose are very fatty, and a lot of white people don't know what to do with fat. So they give it to me.
And I haven't been up to Alaska. And my impression is, Alaska, a lot of people that move to Alaska do a lot of outdoor activity, probably, maybe that's one of the reasons they move up there in a lot of cases. Is obesity a big issue in Alaska like it is in, like the rest of the U.S.? I mean, do you see just a tremendous amount of obese people?
Yeah, especially in the town, the bigger towns like Anchorage. And unfortunately, in the villages, in rural communities, Alaskan Native communities, it's really becoming very pronounced. It's something that you need to read the statistics. You can just see.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a lot of obviously criticism, or not necessarily, well, definitely criticism, but there's a big sort of push to sort of get everybody away from eating animal products. And, I know there's thoughts that some of these indigenous tribes whose entire existence has revolved around hunting whale and seal and whatever else up there, and they try to preserve that. Is there any pushback from the natives saying we want to continue to preserve our sort of traditions and not be forced to eat this other stuff?
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. It's like such a part of Alaskan Native identity, and I think that a lot of the environmental activists, or which I kind of consider myself one of, but I'm a homegrown one. So I come at it from a very different perspective from the people in the lower 48 that moved to Alaska to, work against these big proposals like the Pebble Mine, that if it were to be developed would destroy the last, the bastion, the world's last, stronghold for sockeye salmon. So there's been a, decades plus long effort to fight against that. And I think when you see the people that are in that movement that would generally be promoting this, let's save the environment by eating less beef narrative, they know that that's going to fall on deaf ears, because there's such a cultural, significance to, even beyond the nutrition. It's the cultural significance of hunting and fishing as a cultural way of life. And so subsistence, rights and subsistence identity are very much at the forefront in Alaska, and in fact are used to great effect to pump the brakes on some of these industrial developments that, would otherwise be destroying it, because they're saying, look, this is our direct, relationship to the salmon and to the food that we get that feeds our family through the winter, but also keeps us connected to our, thousands of year, shared history on this in this place. And
Yeah.
it's a powerful message, but I feel like there's a part of it that could go a little bit deeper too, in terms of, if people really adopted it as their primary food source.
Yeah, it would be nice to see them go back. And somebody mentioned the film I was talking about, My Big Fat Diet, Dr. Jay Wortman, and I couldn't remember the doctor that did that experiment up there and had pretty significant improvements in everybody's metabolic health. Do you ever, like you said, your significant other was adding berries into the diet? Have you played with any of that stuff, reintroducing other foods, and if so, any positive, negative results?
Well, so interestingly, I've been pretty strict. And last summer we did a wilderness fat bike trip right at the subarctic. So we were, a pretty high latitude, very, remote, wild place. And where we ended is called Cape Prince of Wales, which is where the mainland Alaska almost touches Russia. And when we got there, we were out of food. And we were, played it close, and we got hit by some pretty nasty weather days that, kept us pinned down. And so when we got to the village, the plan was to fly back to Nome, which is the closest, hub community. But we were stuck there for 5 days, because the plane couldn't fly. And there's a part of this, part of my old brain, from my old days brain, that when you're done with a trip, you celebrate and you eat garbage, and you're like, okay, I'm going to have a celebration. I'm going to eat cake and, pizza and whatever. But I've killed that part of or I thought that I killed that part of my brain. But then we got to Wales and we were stuck, and the only option, was to go to the village store, and it's just stocked with nothing but garbage. And so in that moment, I was like, well, okay, I feel metabolically strong enough. I feel like, I'm not going to slip, by doing this, but I am really hungry, and I'm going to just allow myself to eat this junk. And so I gave myself that first day to eat the junk, but then we were stuck there for 3.5 more days. And so that was the junk that I ate. And unbelievable how fast all these old symptoms came back. Feeling crappy, sleeping like crap, sluggishness. My ankles were like getting poofy, like swelling. Like it was unbelievable. Like, so I feel like I am someone that is particularly sensitive to, the standard American diet. And it was, like as crappy as I felt, and it's like, it took maybe 2 weeks to kind of feel like I was back on a good, even keel again with, myself and digestion and everything. But I also am happy to have had that experience to just remind myself, that is poison, and to just stay away from it.
Yeah, really. I mean, particularly standard American diet stuff, it literally probably is kind of a level of poison, that people, once you kind of experience kind of real good nutrition, it makes a huge difference. And the sad thing is many people never really experience good nutrition. They start out day one even as an infant, starting out on some of this formula and then all immediately onto the grain and rice stuff. And they never experience what it feels like to be healthy. Are you currently working on any documentaries or films or anything like that? What is your current sort of vocation that you're doing?
Yep. That's majority where my effort is at these days. I'm also involved with a little local climate action group. We're trying to find ways to make an impact on a community level. So working on improving the non-motorized transportation infrastructure and walkability, bikeability in my little town of 4,500 people. But then films that I'm working on the one I mentioned about that native tribe of Diomede. It's a kind of a big picture project, and then making a handful of other short films. And I actually just had a film released. I think it screened the other day in Minnesota, something at a bike festival, but it's like a wilderness fat bike trip that my partner and I did in the Arctic. So hopefully that'll be coming out to the public soon. And then, making a series of neat, local ecosystems videos now that don't have any narration, don't have any soundscape other than what the natural soundscape is, and just trying to have it be this immersive experience to see what our different ecosystems within our watershed are like on an intimate level. And that's a really fun project to be working on.
Well, if somebody wanted to watch some of these films, how would they find out about them? Where would they go to see them?
I have a really silly name. I can type it into the my website. I chose a bad name. It's Mjolnir of Bjorn carnivoredie.com.
Oh, like the hammer?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Thor's hammer.
Oh, yeah, exactly. MJOLNIROFBJORN.com.
Okay. Yeah. I guess if you have to know that means hammer or something to
Right.
get that.
And my camera, I usually have my camera like this and it kind of looks like the Mjolnir shape,
Got it. Okay. Well, we are, like I said, unfortunately running out of time. It's been wonderful chatting with you and getting to know you, and thanks for what you're doing and from the conservation side and from spreading that message out there. So thanks a bunch. Is there any other place to go to find you, social media or anything like that? Are you on social media channels?
Yeah, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. Yeah.
Same name, Mjolnir. Is it?
Yeah, or Bjorn. Oh, yeah, Mjolnir Bjorn, I think will get you there. And I think that on the website, all of those are linked on there. I did my job right. I think so. And I just got to say to you, Shawn, like big ups, like keep doing what you're doing. Like you've like really helped my thinking tremendously over the years. I like really respect the hell out of you and yeah, appreciate what you're doing.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. And we're just going to keep trying to, it's all of us. We all have to, as a community, we all have to get out there and get this message out there because, we need thousands and thousands, if not millions of voices. So thanks for being one. Thanks for being here. The rest of you guys, we'll be back tomorrow. Everybody have a good day. Take care. Thanks, Bjorn.
Thanks.